as I mentioned last week, drawn by our calendar. So on one hand, I'll now paraphrase Reform Judaism and also critique it a bit and say I'm autonomous. I'm morally autonomous. I choose, which is mostly not true because we're not autonomous. Whether you accept wisdom or reject wisdom, whether you accept your culture or reject your culture, all of our thinking is done in words. Words are filled with metaphors, our own language, and whether we know it or not, we are carrying within us philosophical systems, thinking systems, literature that we may only know fragments of or distortions of as given to us by our culture. So I am not autonomous, self-legislating. You might say I am created by forces of which I am barely aware, and I only achieve some sort of freedom if I'm aware of all of that which is creating me. Okay, so I'll say that another time. Um, when we think that we're free existentially as opposed to politically, when we think that we are free, it's as if it's an easy effort to discover whatever we call the essential self, which remember is not a thing but a process, and assert oneself into the maelstrom of human living. And then when you take a step back and you look at the nature of your thoughts, feelings, your world, your assumptions, your biases, the lenses, the prisms and prisons by which you see the world, you ask yourself, is there any self left? Or am I, as many people would say in the postmodern camp, we are simply functions of our culture. We don't have an original thought. We may have a tiny little molecule of a thought, um, but who knows if there aren't other people having the same molecule of thought somewhere else. So the question is, who are we? Are we functions of our culture? Are we functions of our tradition? Do we actually self-legislate? Whatever law one says ought be the law, whatever moral approval or condemnation you give anything, are you alone? Did you think this up? Or did somebody hand you a slogan? Did somebody hand you a way to think? For one reason or another, that seemed to be the best slogan, the best way to think at this point in your life. Sometimes you go back in life and you say to yourself, I can't believe I thought that. I can't believe I said that. I personally hope that there are thousands of American college students today who are going to look back on this time in their life and say, I can't believe I thought that. I can't believe I said that. But I look what's happening in the world today. I cannot believe these people are autonomous. They don't know where the river is. They don't know the sea is. They have no idea what's at stake. But they spout these things as if they are sharing some kind of moral truth that they work through. So first of all, this idea of being autonomous, that we are self-legislating, I think is one of the things we have to actually drop in order to achieve some degree of autonomy. So let me take you back into a bit of the journey that I'm developing, mainly because I stumbled into one of the 8 books that I put in my suitcase going to Israel, an essay on man by Ernst Cassirer. I talked about him a bit last week, so go to my YouTube last week or just look him up. He's a phenomenal thinker. Why these 8 books? I can get them on Kindle. The few thousand books of the several thousands that I got rid of, I kept some, and they're in our container on its way by sea to Israel. But there are certain books I want to have them in my hands because they represent, each one a whole library of things that I have studied. And when I hold the physical book and when I thumb through it, these things come back to me. So Cassirer is one of them. This Cassirer was probably one of those life-changing books when I was an undergraduate that made the case of what it means. What philosophers would say, homo symbolicum, the human being who's the symbolizing animal. Let me review a little bit from last time and then go on to tonight. In the beginning of the book, in chapter 1, he clearly identifies with Socrates in several Socratic dialogues. By the way, parenthetically, which is why I also want to teach a philosophy class starting in September on the last days of Socrates, including the Apology. You don't need to have read them. I'm going to give a brief summary. I just want you to know that this is for you. Even if you don't like philosophy, you never intend to read a Socratic dialogue, I'd like you to know the questions and what's at stake. It's going to put things in your head that's going to be better than the last TikTok you looked at, the last YouTube you looked at. It's going to be so much more meaningful to you. So, but in any case, he likes Socrates, because Socrates, if you in the Apology, as we will see, Socrates was facing his death. He's being sentenced to death, and he knows it. So in front of a group of people where he's trying to say, "You're going to execute me. There's not much I can do about it." So I get to talk. I get to talk. You don't like the way I talk? Well, I'm going to get executed, so I'm going to talk as much as I want today. And he talks about his path to self-knowledge, and how many times he did not obey his daimon, his inner guide, whom he talks a lot more about in other dialogues. This is where Socrates says the unexamined life is not worth living if we don't understand what's happening. But Socrates' path to self-knowledge is one of mystery. Socrates even says we have to pay attention to dreams. So the things I tried to talk about last time is to go inside and peel away at consciousness and discover what we sometimes call the true self or the authentic self. We discover it's not static. It's not something where you open a door and see it. You open a door and you go into a vortex of activity. You go into thunder and lightning strikes and the lapping ocean and howling animals and panthers and almonds and Buddhas, and you go in there and there's worlds that are alive in there, and you walk in. By the way, this is the Baal Shem Tov's recommendation of prayer. Remember, Baal Shem Tov says every word of the prayer book is an opening into a world of angels, souls, and worlds. Look how similar this is to Socrates. You go in there, you don't find a static thing, you don't have a meaning. You find meaning being formed out of the, out of the, if I say so, the violence of a profound Rilke poem like the Duino Elegies or something like that. It's stunning what's happening deep inside of us. So Cassirer likes Socrates. Then he moves on to Aristotle, who's very solemn. And Aristotle looks at the human being as mostly a biological being. And then you build from that the human and how we're connected to the world by our senses. So you have this idea of the solemnity of the human being part of an ordered universe, especially the biological universe, and how we respond to our senses and so forth. It's Aristotle that says, what is morality? Well, it's the golden mean. To be courageous is not to be reckless and not to be timid. There's something in the middle. So that's Socrates, as if everywhere we go, we have these two words that we know well. And you walk in and say, well, I don't want to be reckless, but nor do I want to be timid. So let me find this thing in the middle. That's not what it feels like to be moral. That's not what it feels like when you're challenged, when everything in you says reckless or timid, that you can stand back in some kind of solemn, judicious way, find the golden path. Maybe Socrates could do it. I mean, Aristotle could do it. I've not been able to. It's been a lot harder for me to walk anything called a middle or a golden path. Then, the next step after that is the Stoics. And there's a big Stoic revival, and people love the Stoics and to be rational and to be calm. And he quotes Marcus Aurelius. And as I'm reading Cassirer, I say, yeah, you're making a good case, but I don't entirely identify with it. And then he comes and says, now Augustine. And so Augustine was a North African citizen of the Roman Empire. He has studied Platonism through Plotinus, most likely. So thoroughly part of the Greco-Roman tradition. And he was, he was a libertine. He had no restraint, drinking, sex, parties. He read probably the Symposium, the dialogue on Eros and Socrates. He probably knew some hedonists and some Epicureans that, eat, drink, be happy. That's the purpose of our lives. And Christianity was coming down from Judea into North Africa. And, with its messenger, meaning the core Jewish tradition, born by Christianity. And he has a conversion. And he tells this whole story in his book, The Confessions. It's a very heavy tome. You don't have to read it, especially if you're an older person like me. You have to dole out your time very carefully. Read a summary, read a Cliff Notes. It's extraordinary. He says, here's where I began, and then I had a moment. And I want you to think about this moment. Everything you believe, everything you trusted, you realize it has taken you to a very deep, profound error. And again, I want to say, I really hope that, this postmodernism, critical theory, neo-Marxian crowd, whose minds are filled with such intellectual misdirection and guides to nowhere and leads to talk of genocide and hatred, that they wake up one day and said, I've been bamboozled. None of this is real. It has nothing to do with moral reality. I've just learned to take my intrinsic need to hate and found someone convenient to hate, meaning the need to hate is human. First, recognize your need to hate, and then look what people fed you as to whom to hate. And if you hate that, have you actually made anything better? I really hope that generation of people wake up to the hatred of Israel and even hatred of America, where people are burning American flags in America, protesting and then burning the country that allows them to protest. They're not in China. They're not in Russia. They're not going to be thrown in jail. Yeah, you can burn our flag. Just the irony of this. So, but people get convinced. I'm on a path for truth, and I want to destroy the state of Israel, and I want to massacre everybody and make Palestine free of the Jews without having any sense of the moral disgust behind that kind of a statement. Well, they figured out a system. Now, thank God most of us are not deep into that kind of morally disgusting ideology, right? Most of us, I think, here are really trying to work it out. So Augustine says, I had a moment when I realized all my trust in my own reasoning, all my trust in the Aristotelian tradition, the Stoic tradition, the Neoplatonic tradition, has not led me to the truth. And so Cassirer quotes at length the Augustine conversion, his movement from philosophy to religion. Now, I'm not making a case for a religion, because unfortunately, I think most religion, including Judaism, are poorly practiced. I think if I look at orthodoxy, it does reduce down into dogma. I think, I'll be honest with you, my experience of conservative Judaism, that it is painfully superficial and kind of self-congratulatory that they're not Orthodox and not Reformed. It's the worst thing I can say about conservative Judaism where I grew up. And my longtime critique of Reform Judaism, they've reduced all of Reform Judaism to a kind of a left-leaning social action, which does not exhaust the world of ethical responsibility. But they act as if it does. That if you don't agree with their program, somehow you're not a good human being. So I look at the main ways that Judaism is presented, and each of these are so profoundly deficient. Of course, identify with what I've done. I said, you want to keep tradition, not keep tradition. You want to mix it up, modern and traditional. You want to see your religion as shaping your politics. That's great, but know the mystery. So this is where this book profoundly influenced me in making me as a rabbi. The job of religion is to connect you to the mystery. Now, once you know the mystery, you're not so sure about how much law we should keep. You're not so sure about how important it is that you walk the line between the Orthodox and Reform. You're not so sure of whether your pronouncements on social action are serving some other interest, or have you really painfully worked out truly what the right moral path is. In fact, I've never been in sustained conversation with a Reform rabbi where they had done any of this work. They're simply following the party line. So the Judaism that we've put together, that we teach, is one of existential anxiety. Do I know the truth? Have I encountered the truth? Am I fooling myself? How do I find my path to the divine? And in working out my path to the divine, maybe I'll know something about how much Jewish practice to keep. And maybe I'll know something about what's at stake when I make a moral pronouncement that I tell everybody else in the world that they should follow. Maybe I haven't done enough work to think all this through, what the consequences are of the moral advice that I give others. So Constantine's revelation for me has profound ramifications for everything. But for Kassir, um, it's the rationality. In fact, he says the following on page 11, um, critiquing rationality. There are things which, because of their subtlety and infinite variety, defy every attempt at logical analysis. Logic and metaphysics are themselves no better positioned to understand and solve the riddle of the human being. Their first and supreme is the law of contradiction. Rational thought, logical and metaphysical thought can comprehend only those objects which are free from contradiction, which have a consistent nature of truth. Well, we human beings do not have a consistent nature. We don't have a consistent understanding of truth, and we're filled with contradictions. So how do we understand the human being in any kind of philosophic way? So then he moves on. I'm on page 12. Now with the Augustinian critique, which again, as I said in my preface to my Shabbat thought, which is thoroughly biblical, because the biblical critique, how many times says, don't trust yourself. You cannot rely on yourself. The whole book of Job is to question the idea that God is behind what happens to us as human beings. You look at Psalms, many places in Proverbs, the human being is a painful, tragic mystery. Sometimes there are moments of light and truth that break through, but even then you have to ask yourself, am I being arrogant? Am I assuming that I've seen the truth when all I've actually seen is another guide toward intellectual and spiritual obscurity? What is given here is not meant to be a theoretical solution to the problem of the human being. Religion cannot offer such a solution. Religion cannot be clear and rational. What it relates is an obscure and somber story. Now here Kassir is bringing in Augustine. It is the story of sin and the fall of the human being. It reveals a fact that no rational explanation is possible. Religion, therefore, never pretends to clarify the mystery of the human being. It confirms and deepens the mystery. God is sometimes called the Deus absconditus, the God who has left the stage. The human being remains the Homo absconditus. We've also somehow abandoned our self. Religion is no theory of God and the human being and the relation. The only thing that we receive from religion is the will of the divine to conceal the divine self. So as I'm reading this, it's a really beautiful, beautiful appeal to use the religion, and I don't mean religion practiced today, either religion reduced to dogma, religion reduced to politics, but rather, and I'll explain more of this in a moment, religion as a obscure poem to which you give yourself. You give yourself into the interiority of a self-writing poem and discover yourself to be a self-writing poem. I remember when I reading Kassir and others, when I had this thought, I thought to myself, I'm in a tradition that's self-writing because we are joining in and we are continuing to write the poem. And I remember thinking that I'm a self-writing poem and God is the reader of the poem. I just remember having this very strong sense as I tried to write my poem, which means not just live life, but consciously understand the obscurities, the metaphors, the dead ends, the visions, the dreams that constituted me. I just had a sense of the divine reading my poem, over my shoulder and saying, you work on that metaphor. You're not telling the truth there. You got to find a better way to say that. So that's one of my early definitions of the human being when I was in my 20s. The human being is a self-writing poem and God is the reader. I still believe it. It's not all I have, but it's a lot of what I think. And he talks about the Enlightenment. And then he says, and all of this work in the Enlightenment tells us there's no authority anymore. You thought that the church had authority, but then even science has no authority. If you look at the history of science, one theory replaced by another. Siri wants to talk. Okay, Siri, you have to wait for talk. And then I'll take you to the end of chapter 1. um, uh, where we can finally move into what he calls the knowledge of our nature. Psychology, ethnology, anthropology, history of a mass, an astoundingly rich and constantly increasing of body and facts. But nevertheless, then he says, here's who we are as human beings. We live in a world of symbols. Now, one book I did not take with me is The Social Construction of Reality by Peter Berger, where he takes Cassir's ideas and he turns it into a social theory, where we human beings are inherently symbol makers from within our culture. We project our myths and symbols onto a canopy. Then we live under this canopy and we forget that is the canopy that we ourselves have thrown up. And then we defer to the canopy as if it is God's canopy shining down. So on one hand, we have to look at symbol, culture, religion as somehow self-created, but Peter Berger leaves open the question whether above the sacred canopy that we build, if there's a divine light, like a sukkah, shining through the canopy. Put differently, can God's light only shine through to us if we build a sacred canopy, but don't confuse our sacred canopy with truth? So this is why existentialism speaks to me so much. On one hand, we will always be throwing up sacred canopies. Therefore, we have to really look carefully at the symbols and ideas and that have been thrown our way, and we have to assess them, with the tool of rationality. We have to look at this world that we're living by and constantly assess its spiritual and moral valence. And then in a calm moment, realize the divine can only shine through to us through symbols. So I want you to think of a symbol as one of the ways that God's presence shines through to us. So what does this have to do with our march toward the high holidays? Well, if last week we went into the Socratic and biblical room of the constant formation of human identity, and this week we say, well, I'm not trusting any system, which is a profoundly existentialist idea, other than a couple of things. Number one is I err, and I have erred. I have made mistakes. And when I go back in my life and I look at my mistakes, something in me said that was the right thing to do, either contrary to what I thought was true, meaning I was weak, or what I thought was true, I actually thought was true, and I did it according to some thinking system, and I was wrong. So part of our path to high holidays, again, using biblical ideas, and certainly Christian ideas, Augustinian ideas, and ideas throughout our tradition. When you face the self, you face a self that errs. And sometimes we've erred in things that have really, really hurt ourselves and hurt others. So when you discover the self, part of what you're discovering is a self that errs, or if you want to put it more religiously and brutally, a self that sins. What are you going to do about that? What are we going to do about the fact, and I hope you don't mind saying in a brutal religious way, what are we going to do about the fact that we sin? So that's the second step for me. Again, this is most of the way through chapter 1 of Cassir, meaning we sin. And then chapter 2 is, and we symbolize. We sin and we symbolize. In fact, the word sin is a symbol because it has inexhaustible depth. And now as we move toward the high holidays, we realize we are moving through a symbol system, as we write our self-writing poem in which the symbolism of sin now takes a large stage, and all the things that implies, including regret, repair, tikkun, the way that we adjust our consciousness and adjust our behavior. All right, hence step 2. I have a lot more to say tomorrow on Cassir and the symbol system into which we are walking. But tonight I wanted to just give a taste of all of this and prepare for tomorrow. All right, Yoshi, you can put me in gallery view. I think I might have a couple of questions.
Before you go, can you show
Yes.
us the front of the book one more time? An essay on man. Thank you.
Yeah, Ernst Cassir. phenomenal book. By the way, I'm reading now the milieu in which Cassirer uh, uh, um, came into being in Germany. His great philosophical competitor was Martin Heidegger. So Heidegger and Cassirer were in a kind of a competition. Who was the deepest man in into life of Germany? In fact, there's a God, I read a book on them, something. I believe it's called "The Time of the Magicians," which shows how they end up debating each other. And Heidegger, I don't know if he's smarter. He's just, you know how obscurity can sound smart. So that's Heidegger. But Cassirer comes off as such a mensch. So I'm restraining from myself and just teaching classes on Cassirer and Karl Jaspers and that whole intellectual milieu of Germany uh, during the Weimar Republic after World War I and before the Nazi takeover. It's I'm reading about Hannah Arendt this week, who was the mistress of Martin Heidegger. I did not know that. But wow, it's what was happening in Weimar Germany between 1919 and 1933 is just astonishing off the charts. I mean, Paul Tillich was there, Carl Jung was there, Karl Jaspers was there. So it's just it's if I ever get into the podcasting, I want to bring on a historian who's expert in that area. I just want to talk for hours about all the forces that were happening in the Weimar Republic during this time. So yeah, Ernst Cassirer was there. Read about Ernst Cassirer and just be ready to be blown away. Thank you for that.